Hello everyone. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us. I'm deeply honored being your facilitator for today and being in the presence of our wonderful presenters we may have met a few minutes ago. There's just one thing we'd like you to remember very well. It's that this is about exchanging what's going around the world, about everyone sharing their experience so we can all benefit from it. This isn't a one-way presentation, so feel free to join us. Just raise your hand and you'll be given 1 minute to share your thoughts with us. 1 minute, 45 seconds. So we'll try to get as many ideas as possible while respecting the time frame we have. So without further ado, I'll give voice to Emily Vargas-Barón. Emily, I'm sorry, but I think you are muted.
Sorry, right. I committed the cardinal sin. Yes, we are going to have 3 questions today, and we're going to start with the first one, but I'd like to read them through. What policy initiatives for UDL should be undertaken? That's our first one. What should we be doing in the policy field? 2, how might these policies be implemented? And the third question is, who should implement these policies? So the first one identifies the kinds of policies that we all feel should be conducted and should be prepared and then implemented, which is the most important part. As you think about this, I know some of you come from particular countries. Think about your country. What policy would you like to see move forward? Some of you are working in a particular level of education. What would you like to see in your school system or in your early childhood activities that deal with children with diverse backgrounds? Or some of you come from agencies. What would you like to have your agency do as a policy? So I open it up to you. The question is, what policy initiatives for UDL should be undertaken? Feel free to just speak up.
Can you hear me?
And if you're speaking,
this is Bethany Brown.
Great, thank you, Bethany.
I was really excited to hear some of these presentations, and I'm lucky to work with Dorothy at International Disability Alliance. I'm a human rights advisor there, and I have two ideas that have come to my mind, and I'm curious to know what others think too. One is awareness raising for learners with disabilities to be able to advocate for UDL themselves, for awareness raising for families so that they can be doing advocacy for UDL. And so those are the sort of 2 constituencies I can imagine really benefiting from awareness raising about this. And then the other aspect that comes to mind for me is really a change in policy for the way that teachers are certified so that teachers can be aware. And maybe we would also want to put them in the category of awareness raising so that they're demanding this type of work for themselves as well. I don't know whether that was 1 minute, but I hope that it was. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
A great intervention, and I think the importance of including UDL in pre-service training is extremely important. So you really put your finger on a very important area. Other comments?
Yes, this is Janette Kaligi, calling from Washington, and I'm from Disability Inclusive Development Programs, DDPAS, and a great member of IDA, and a supporting member also of IDA. We work globally with a focus on African countries. I wanted to actually give the perspective of the implementation. Most of the time we forget to budgetize ULD simply because it's not part of the priorities. So people tend to forget that, you know, education need to be budgetized, and then also education for person with disability need to be also at the table. So everything that we are talking about, yes, we do not have qualified staff. We do not have the equipment that they need. We do not have also the communication, including also the collaboration with other institutions. All this will take place when we have the budget, we have the money. I did a lot of research and I wrote a lot of documents, but the key is, where is the money? How can we get the money to the table? So if there is no money, all the policy that we are discussing will never be implemented. That's my 1 cent.
Thank you, Janette. That's a very important observation. Within policy, provision for budgetary allocation and then vigilance over expenditures over time is very, very important. And I think that we do have to advocate at a level of policy where one does come in contact with the funding. Funding, though, is not just at the national level. Many countries are decentralized, and you will have at your regional or provincial level a government body that has a budget. And at municipal or local district county levels, you will find another budget. So you're really talking about budgeting at the 3 levels in most countries now, because there is such an increase in decentralization. I see we have another comment to be made. Hello? Beth, you're on.
Oh, thank you. I'm thinking out loud. I apologize, but I just want to say I'm really thrilled to be part of this discussion. I've read so much from so many of you who have written and published about UDL and inclusion. I'm the UDL IRN Implementation Special Interest Group Chair, and I co-chair that with a colleague of mine. And I have been a learning support coordinator in an international school, a private school, and we offer the IB, the International Baccalaureate. And in terms of policy change at the private, proprietary and non-proprietary international school level, I would like to see a policy change in the accreditation of international schools. I would like to connect with the Council of International Schools, which right now bases many of their accreditation standards on the United Nations Rights of the Child. And I would like them to expand their accreditation standards to include the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, specifically the recommendations for UDL implementation and training mentioned many times in Article 24. I believe that UDL should be front and center as not just one aspect or mention of being a future global citizen, but I think it should be centered in the way that IB education is structured. And I believe that can happen, but it has to happen at the policy level. And schools that are being accredited and run the International Baccalaureate often tout themselves as the highest global standard for quality global education. And I believe that policies should reflect that in implementing UDL at the classroom level as well.
Thank you, Beth. That's a very astute observation, and one that certainly has been true for a lot of private school work in various countries. They set the standard. What is high quality education? If
Emily?
they are implementing it, would be very helpful. Sure, go ahead, Sue.
Emily, I see one more hand is up, but I think maybe we should pass to Anne and let her deepen the discussion, and I'm sure Cecilia would have a chance to make his intervention.
I think that's a good idea, Sue. Anne?
Great. Yeah. So we're going to talk now about how do you implement it, which I think this is a bit of a fluid conversation anyway. But I like what we talked about, that it's not just governments. One of the things that I thought so interesting, unfortunately, Josh had to jump off, but that USAID mentions UDL in their education policy. And this year alone, 40% of their education projects require a UDL component. So I think that really talks about the importance of policy, the importance of funding, and how we need to get donors engaged in this. And how do we get UNICEF and do pilot projects where governments can learn from that? We did an interesting pilot project in Ghana that had policy on UDL, but what does that mean? It hadn't really been done at a scale yet. So just thinking through the importance of bringing in donors into this discussion. And so I think we have someone else with their hand raised if you want to provide your comment as well. I don't see it up here, but oh yes.
Yes, it's Suleiman, I believe. You can unmute yourself. Hello.
All right, while he's looking at the unmute features, does anyone else have a comment or where they think how we can
Suleiman
actually
is deaf, so he's Gurdman will have to voice.
Yes. So can
the interpreter is trying to find Suleiman on screen. Sorry, just a second.
Okay.
Suleiman, add pin. Yes, Suleiman, go ahead. Yes, I can see you. Clear. Okay, thank you. You were discussing inclusive education. And when I look at UDL, and the concept is very good. I love it. Because here in Nigeria, the government has an inclusive educational policy. But the question is, how will the Nigerian government implement it? And that's the challenge in Nigeria. When we're talking about the policy level, the policy may be there, but how to make it practical for the learners with disabilities? How can we meet the needs of all students? And how can we make sure the money is challenged to make sure that the ultimate goal is achieved, which is inclusive education? Through maybe universal design for learning, but the ultimate aim we must keep in mind is inclusive education. Thank you.
I think that's a really good point. And it brings back that need to get donors involved, and that you can have it in the policy, but it can sit in the policy. So looking at how we can do pilot projects, and I really suggest doing pilot projects in not just the capitals, but looking into the rural areas. We've been told so many times that pilot projects won't work or UDL won't work. These teachers have 100 kids in their classroom. They're already overworked. But the fact is that it does, as we heard from the woman from Ghana. So how do we do that pilot project? How do we share on it? How do we build those lessons learned before we then take it to scale? And we have a couple more questions here. Dorothy?
Yes, go ahead. Actually, I think it's time for Sue to take voice now. But
I will call on Dorothy first thing, I promise.
Exactly.
So the paper that we're going to come out with in a couple of weeks, which will be on the IDEA website, we have some key recommendations on policy. So we think it's important to promote UDL as non-discrimination in education. It's key for everyone to understand that. And it is one of the steps in continuing support for inclusive education. However, we want to make sure that people understand that UDL still needs accessibility and reasonable accommodation in order to create a truly accessible system. UDL isn't by itself a guarantee of access or accommodation. And it fits beautifully because we want children to learn how they learn themselves. That's what UDL is about. Pull out a child's ability to manage their own learning. We also want children with disabilities to learn how to manage their own accommodations, how to ask for what they need, how to make sure that there's accessibility. So advocacy can happen on a personal level as well as on a systems level. We want to ensure that civil society organizations can successfully engage and network and support each other and their governments around issues of a universal design for learning. And we believe that sometimes research programs or funding programs aren't inclusive of organizations of persons with disabilities, and they should be. There's a richness there, there's an understanding there, there's an ability to move forward. We also think it's important to engage in research by collecting the voices of persons with disabilities who have experienced educational environments that are, at least to some extent, a universal design for learning idea. Now, as a policymaker, there's one thing I want to, former policymaker, I want to make sure we understand that if we wait to do UDL until we have budget and everything is taken care of and paid for, we're going to be waiting until hell freezes over, because that's not how change happens. We have to take personal responsibility. Teachers, principals, parents, people with disabilities have to be willing to stand up and say, this is a human rights issue, and thus it isn't limited by budget access. So we could speak out and say, what is there something each of us can do now to support universal design for learning? The dignity of persons with disabilities and their families, dignity is a human right. And we are now making families of children with disabilities beg, even in advanced nations, for the right to non-discrimination in education. So with that, because human rights are not rights that we give to other people because we deem them to be human, God knows people with disabilities have suffered from that deeming. Human rights are rights that we ensure for other people because we are human. So what can you do as a human being to advance non-discrimination in education, the inclusion of children with disabilities, the inclusion with other differences in learning environments? What can you do to advance UDL? That's my question for you.
Does anyone want to tell us what would they do?
Well, one thing I think I'll speak up to that, Sue. I feel very strongly that leadership in schools, standing often with the principal and head teachers, supervisors, unless they are very convinced that UDL is going to help them maximize in achieving their objectives, we will not move forward. A teacher can be enlightened, well-trained, have the support even of other teachers at the same level, and will not be able to move the activities forward because of the leadership that they live within. So I think strategically, focusing especially on the in-service training of principals, head teachers, and others dealing with the teachers is very important. Also the parents. The parents carry us on their shoulders. The parents are
Yes.
leaders. They are
Yes, we do.
and I always look to the parents to tell us which is the way to go, and they know what is good for their children. And UDL fits within their framework the minute they hear about that their child will be able to learn the way their child learns best. So I would say that we need to think strategically about this as well.
So we have Cecilia Wairimu. hope I pronounced it well. She had a very good comment in the chat section. She said, "Hi everyone, I am Cecilia Wairimu Nyaga from Kenya. UDL is a welcome idea. The challenge currently is how to manage inclusive education programs. I support the idea of piloting the same so as to explore how it may work in different schools, localities, and countries."
Just so it's truly a pilot, just so it truly is designed with the intention of being taken up and moved forward. Too many demonstrations are designed for a demonstration period, and that basically they're designed to end. And we do need to be thinking about the systemic impact of pilots and demonstrations. And too many parents are left brokenhearted when they love a demonstration and it ends. So I love your use of the word pilot, Cecilia. I think that's the key concept here. Is it needs to be seen as something that we're doing to enable what follows and to be committed to what follows before we even start.
Right. Designing to go to scale from the beginning.
Yep.
So if you design a pilot, make sure that you also have the design for its expansion insofar as it's possible to see it. Again, thinking strategically.
And just one point about that, about dissemination and going to scale. So often we try to expand within a nation. And in fact, the best expansion would be to look for other parts of the world that are similar demographically or have similar challenges. You might be in a different nation, but have the same kinds of rural poverty or urban poverty or other things going on that if you could communicate with each other, you could learn from each other in very significant ways.
Well, thank you very much. I believe now it's time for Anne we need to transition to Anne, I believe.
I'm the last, so
Yeah.
Ben already spoke. But if Anne has other questions to ask, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say about the discussion of the piloting in UDL. I have found it very helpful to break down misperceptions that often we think of why things can't happen. And I don't think we give enough credit to teachers. There's this belief that they're already so overburdened that they don't want to take on anything new, but they're doing this anyway in their classrooms. So we're asking them to think through just a slight shift in modification to their work. So it's building upon what's already working and being able to change those opinions and show how it can work as we take it to scale. So in some ways, to me, the pilot is almost to show, to kind of take away the disbelievers that this is here and there, and then to maybe think, okay, well, what supports did you need differently? How did the training work? Did you need more time? So it's about tweaking it a little bit here and there, but it's also kind of taking away those falsehoods, because we are seeing it work. We're seeing it work in places that people thought it couldn't happen. Teachers are inventive individuals. And so just giving them the power to do this, but I think we've talked about this again and again, bringing parents along. Because often our UDL pilots are small in nature, small in funding, and don't involve a community component. So how do we think about that from the very beginning as we scale up as well?
And I think it's important that UDL supports everyone in the system to learn. So it is about understanding our own data and our own observations and our own evidence, not necessarily looking for external published peer-reviewed evidence that tells us what to do, but looking at the children that we're teaching or our children to see, are they happy? Are they engaged? Are they motivated? Is this working at an observable level? I have a personal belief. My son, Charlie, was always included in school after second grade. Charlie was profoundly disabled and legally blind, and he never had a teacher in his whole career who didn't tell me that it was their best year in teaching. Because bad inclusion is better than exquisite segregation. And Charlie started out just being thrown into the class, and the teachers were looking for tools to make it work because they believed in non-discrimination. And they really wanted to make it work. I think UDL is one of those tools. That if a teacher has an intention to teach all children, if the teacher has an intention to build a better society where everyone has access to education, if they have that intention and they find UDL, now they have a tool to do it well.
And I'm also seeing, I'm sure as other people are seeing, a bit of a medicalization of education, where we have to diagnose a child, we have to medically say what they are, and then this teacher is supposed to come in and change their curriculum for this one individual.
Yeah.
And no teacher can do that, even with 20 kids and a high without the support. And so asking teachers with 100 kids in their classroom with no electricity, no materials, that's where teachers say, I can't do this. I can't do 7 different curriculums. So they shut it down. So I think UDL opens up the inclusion. And I think the other thing that's really helpful is that we are both parents of children with low instance disabilities, but I'm also the parent of a child with a high instance disability. And so dyslexia and low vision and low hearing are often not identified in most of the contexts that we work. And UDL automatically gives to those children. And it moves from, I think I like this statement, it moves from disability to variability, allowing each of us to work and recognizing you don't have to diagnose to help a child and to do inclusion. And so I think we're putting a lot of funding into diagnosis and identification, because that's where it goes back to our medical model that people fall back into. So I think the nice thing about UDL is not just non-discrimination, but it's also more progressive and it's more of the social model.
Right. And if a country has a good ECI system, early childhood intervention system, it is possible to move seamlessly through transition planning, bringing both the family and the child, as well as the teachers, the principal, everybody together. So as the child transitions from early childhood intervention services, the child goes into the school, and everybody learns in the school what the child has achieved, what the child is next learning about and gaining in the way of a new developmental level, and the child moves on very beautifully. So if we can build over time that dream that I certainly have of having competent early childhood intervention systems that are the foundation for the child moving into an inclusive, welcoming school as an environment, as well as teaching, learning activities, then we shall have children who will flourish over all of their lives. And that is the continuity that we all seek after having worked very hard with the children in the early period. So we'll see if that is possible in the future. I would like to caution people that policy is not an answer by itself. We have had countries where they have written beautiful policies of inclusion, but it was stopped by the same people that approved it because there was a tacit, unexpressed resistance to inclusion. There, a counter approach has been used in a series of countries of developing UDL approaches, and from the teachers in schools, the principals upward, they have made policy changes to complement what some people wanted at the policy level. So
I see we're being called back to the big room. So
okay.
Indeed. Thank you. We'll see you in the main room. I can't wait to hear what you've been discussing.